Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm Julie Livingston with Want Leverage Communications, and I'm here for another installment of Julie's PR Patter, a series of conversations where I talk to people in my network about marketing and public relations. So sometimes you just get lucky in life, and that's kind of how I feel about today's guest. We originally met through New York Women in Communications, an organization we were active in for more than 20 years as volunteer leaders. And every year we'd work on the annual Matrix Awards, which is an amazing event for outstanding women in the communications and entertainment industries. She's one of my go-to people with whom I can share PR issues, resources, and brainstorm. And I'm just delighted to welcome Judy Kalvin, president of Kalvin Public Relations, an agency that specializes in working in the creative services industry. She'll tell you about that in a moment, placing their stories in key media outlets and amplifying their reach and their messaging. So Judy, welcome. It is so great to see you on a Wednesday morning.
Thanks, Julie. It's so great to be here. It's great to be here. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. I don't know if I could add much to that.
I told you I didn't need to do much research for it.
Yes.
We know each other so well and for so long. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and what your specialty area is?
Sure. Be happy to. Yes. I've been in the public relations industry for, as Julie said, probably more years than I really want to admit. And I founded my agency, Kalvin PR, about 20 years ago, actually. And I found this niche that I love, and it's basically the B2B services industry, creative agencies, advertising agencies, branding agencies, design agencies, folks who need to reach people, on the corporate side. So what I do is I help them get massive media coverage, which can help them stand apart and make them the agency of choice for big brands like Hershey's and Nestle's and all of the big CPG type of companies and big professional services companies that need their services. And it's very hard for them to stand out because there's thousands of agencies in this niche. So what I do is really help them find what sets them apart, and promote what they do, because many of them do wonderful things.
Right. And to really promote their competitive advantage. I mean, there are so many resources for agencies to go to, advertising agencies, brands to go to. How do you pick? Which leads us to today's topic, about leveraging your founder story to get media coverage and to differentiate your brand. So I know you've done a lot of this work, and I've always been impressed by the amazing media coverage you've gotten for clients by telling their founder story. Tell us a little bit about your experience, and then I'd like to know, I'd like to talk about, what happens if your founder on the outside doesn't seem to have such a compelling story? How do we create that as publicists? I mean, we're not magicians, but how do we kind of cultivate something that's going to have that stickiness with the media?
Well, exactly. And you said the word stickiness is important. I mean, it's very difficult for a couple of agencies to really, differentiate who they are. They all say, "Oh, we're creative and we're strategic," and I'm like, "Well, that doesn't set you apart." But there are cases where they have some very interesting founder stories, and when it comes down to it, it's all about people. People buy from people, right?
That's right.
So you need to get to the human side of your story in order to make it resonate, in order to make it interesting, in order to stand apart. So there are cases where I've worked with agencies that have fabulous founder stories. I work with one agency, Chase Design Group, and their founder, Margot Chase, was an unbelievable visionary. She was a typographic genius. She had this very interesting way of setting herself apart. And she was the visionary to start this firm back in 1986. And everything about her was baked into her agency. But
so
then,
that sense of adventure and innovation and
and craft. I mean, everything was
craft,
very,
right.
it was very, I mean, really set the agency apart. And then several years ago, she tragically died in an aviation accident. And the idea was, all right, now our founder is gone. What do we do? And the smart thing that they've done is they've baked her story into everything they do. Even new people who come in to work for the agency are given a presentation of their founder story,
That's
and they
great.
see what sets them apart. And they've been doing a brilliant job of it, and they are extremely successful with that.
So it's really, if I think that if, I do this for my clients as well, it's really distilling and really drilling down to those basic things, those differentiators that are unique to your organization.
Exactly.
Would you
Organization.
agree?
Right. It doesn't have to be the founder who has this cool story.
Right. It could be the founder, could be the company.
It could be the company. It could be, I mean, you've got stories, obviously, the Sarah Blakely story with Spanx is a great example, right? She has the story of how, she was frustrated. So she cut off the bottoms of her pantyhose in order to like wear them on, underneath her pants. And, she's got this great story, but you also have stories of companies and how they got started, and some of it is really, really compelling. I
It
mean,
is.
you've got companies like, and they use those stories, right? They use the story of like, everything is about how did you overcome a conflict, right? So like, even in a story, you've got like, a company like Pampers, right? So they started out, being like the first of these disposable diapers, right? They didn't have a founder, but what they did was they found the first people who started using their products and went and interviewed them and started using them in their advertising. And so they put a human face on their story.
Right. Right. And they real and right. And they amplified that story. And that's what you and I do is we get our clients' stories featured in the media and other places across digital platforms, etc.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
I think it's really interesting about Chase Design, how their founder is no longer with us and with them. And they're still drawing upon those differentiators to heighten and talk about their competitive advantage. That's really what sets them apart from other design firms.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
these are characteristics that really have longevity,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
That really relate to everything they do. So anything that they put out, whether it's an email newsletter on behalf of their agency, or I don't know, a holiday card or something, or a presentation, or of course the work they do for their clients, is
Hmm.
going to have those core elements embedded into it. So
Exactly,
you're constantly seeing the repetition of
right.
that those messages, the founder's story.
Exactly.
Um,
It's baked into everything they do, and
so
that's important.
ha- I have found that some innovators, or presidents of organizations, CEOs, are a little uncomfortable about sharing their story, right? I'm sure you've had the same thing where they're, well, I don't know if my story's so interesting or compelling, or whatever. How do you, like, what are some of your techniques to kind of pull it out of them?
Torture.
Torture works.
It's, if you relate it, if you can explain and give them examples of how it's worked for other agencies and other companies, and depending upon what type of company it is, and you really have to just keep explaining and convincing that that they're human, right? That we want to find the human side. That again, reiterating over and over, I can't say this enough. People buy from people. They want to buy you as a human, right? You may not be the person in the room selling to that particular client, right? But you want those people who are selling for you to have that story to take.
Right. People are going to buy kind of what you stand for. It's one of the things that I love about that radio show, How I Built This with Guy Raz. I
Mm,
love hearing about those founder stories and,
right.
how people, very often ordinary people who had no background in being inventors or innovators, found an idea, came upon an idea and developed it into something kind of extraordinary, and how they built upon it, how they solved a particular problem, like the woman from Spanx, and
Exactly.
developed it into a product or service.
Right. How they overcame those challenges. Everybody loves those stories, right? Because it really gives you like this sense of like accomplishment. And the thing is you bake that accomplishment into your company and people admire that and they look up to that, right? It's you can be selling the most mundane product, but if you have a story behind it, it's compelling and it will inform everything you do.
So once you have developed the founder story, where can people place it? I mean, they can obviously, develop a pitch and send it to media outlets that matter to them. In your clients' cases, the advertising, branding, packaging trades, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's major consumer outlets as well that cover those industries. Those businesses specifically. But where else can companies and brands amplify their founder story in a way that would underscore their brand values and positioning?
Well, and I think you do this brilliantly, is you've got to really put that into it's your own content channels where this has to be. Again, in the case of Margot Chase, they have a section on their website which is it is dedicated to her founder story, right? And you could do it in your blogs, you could do it on your LinkedIn, you could do it in your Instagram, you could do it, on all of the channels where folks find you. I mean, those are your most valuable channels are your own content. So you need to be putting, weaving that story into all of those channels as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you know what? It's sometimes can feel challenging to always keep that content fresh. You always have to look for kind of a new angle or a new way to kind of liven it up over time. But I think with all of the digital tools that we have at our fingertips these days, graphics, video, audio, I mean, there are just so many ways that you can reinvigorate a founder's story, and a branding message on those kinds of content platforms, and
Mhm.
each one could be slight is can be their own, can be slightly different.
Exactly.
um
Right.
no, I
Exactly.
think that's great. And with Margot's case, where she is not around anymore, you have her partners, people at the firm who can speak to her legacy. So that's something that you could use going forward, even now.
Right. I'm even pitching podcasts now to talk about how they've kept her legacy alive and how has helped them distinguish themselves from other agencies.
Oh,
So that
that's great.
yeah, yeah, and I'm getting a lot of really good traction with those kind of pitches.
That's great. I mean, she had such an amazing story to tell. And I think, that is a case where the brand is so strong and has such staying power that
Mhm,
even after the founder is gone, that it still is resonant.
mhm.
Um, and and I would imagine that the people who are running the company now, is it a spouse, or is it somebody? No, it's not.
No,
Wow.
that it was her business partner.
Wow, amazing. So they can really still speak to those characteristics that set them apart.
Exactly. And again, and I think what's very important too is because you think about it, people come and go from companies and agencies, right? So you constantly have to like remind people. Some of the people who have been working there the last 3, 4, 5 years never met her. They never were there when she was there.
Right. Right.
So you have to constantly keep that story alive for them as well, so
Right.
that they understand it and they are part of this legacy and understand the importance of it as well.
So Judy, once you have crafted this story, you developed what we call a media pitch, which is sort of like a little sales pitch. It's usually a paragraph or two that you send to a particular journalist that who covers the space. But how do you identify those individuals? I know a lot of people find this very confusing.
I mean, how do you identify the
The
media?
specific the specific media outlets and journalists that you want to pitch your story to.
Well, I mean, I think you could go a little bit out. There is, like you said, there's your typical ones, right, that cover the industry all the time, right? But you can go and you could be a little bit, you could look outside the box, so to speak, and look for small business. In my case, the agencies I represent would be considered small businesses, right? So you can go to the Inks and the entrepreneurs and the other, online public and the fast companies, et cetera, and relate that to how it has energized a business. So you can look out to those and identify the right reporters who work and are sort of steeped in these industries and cover them, right? So they cover the small businesses, or they cover people in creative, in the creative space,
Sure.
right?
I find that it's also helpful to follow those journalists on social media and, kind of like and comment on their posts with real substantive commentary, not like great posts, but really is to show that you're really invested in what they're covering and what they're writing about, because
Hmm.
that is like sort of an intro relationship building kind of a tool.
Right.
And then eventually you could build up to, a pitch. I read your piece on, always reference something that they wrote. Make sure that what you're pitching really is in alignment with what they cover specifically, because otherwise
Right.
they'll discard it in a minute. Journalists get overloaded with pitches from outside sources, so you have to be really targeted and specific. But I think following them and being active on their social media platforms in a positive, a constructive way is really also a really powerful tool to get your brand in front of them.
Yes, and to your point, sometimes I go an extra step in between those, following them on social media and maybe liking and commenting, et cetera, because also sometimes they're looking for a source, and if I'm able to respond to
I
that.
was just going to say that I have from one of my clients, a management consulting firm. We one of the people there was interviewed by a human resources publication on a particular topic, and a few months later, the reporter, who was so delighted with what this person contributed to her piece, called me again to see if she could interview her another time. And then most recently has been reaching out on a regular basis saying, Julie, do you know somebody who might be a good source for this other story I'm working
Mhm.
on? It's not related to what I interviewed for
Right.
before, but it's on another HR topic. I need somebody specifically in this space, and I'll share it with my PR networks, and ultimately we'll usually find her a great source. And so we built this trusting relationship over years. I know that you've done this a lot with reporters over the years. They look to you as somebody who could really help them to source their stories.
Well, it's like any other relationship. It goes both ways, right? I always consider my relationships with journalists to be symbiotic, right? I mean, I look to them, and obviously I'm pitching them for a reason. I want them to do my story,
Yeah.
but I also I've had cases where like a new reporter came on and I was trying to reach them and I couldn't, and I knew the editor, and the editor like took my pitch and walked into his office and put it on his desk and say, listen to Judy. She understands.
That's
Listen
great.
to her pitch, respond to it, and we've become extremely close, friends and colleagues ever since, right? Because yes, you have to respect. Look, I started in journalism. I remember what it was like
So
getting by these like ridiculous, like pitches that had nothing to do with what I was covering. And so I appreciate the time that the journalists these days have so little time that you have to be able to get to them quickly. You have to know what they're looking for. And one of the other things we do, which I'm sure you do as well, is when I'm reading their stories, even if it has nothing to do with my client, a lot of times I'll just send them an email and say, and say, you know what, that story you did was so interesting. And, I learned something about, something I didn't know before. And just to like give them, just to make them understand that I'm reading their stuff, that I'm,
I think that's awesome. That's so awesome because, and you're not just kissing up. This is a sincere comment,
yeah,
and sincere feedback. And And again, that's how you continue to develop that trust and position yourself as a go-to source for sure.
Exactly. And they know when they reach out to me that even if it's not, like you said, if it's not one of, I don't have a client that can help them, I will do my best to help find them the
Oh,
source,
absolutely. Absolutely.
right?
Uh, absolutely. That's the best way, I think, to really develop a longer term relationship with a journalist for sure.
Exactly, exactly.
For
Like I
sure.
said, you want to be, you don't want to be that PR person that is just the, looking only when it helps you. You want to be helping them as well. And that's what, again, we say this all the time that, it again, people, we're talking to people. We're not talking, we are relating to other humans, and you have to be a human in order to relate to
It's
the
good to be human. Yeah, I mean, and also once you have landed that fabulous story about your founder, one of the other ways you can again say a virtual thank you is by sharing that placement, that story on your social media channels, on your website, and tagging the reporter and the media outlets. That's like saying thanks, high five. We really appreciate the coverage. Um, if there's anything we can do for you in the future, I hope you'll reach out. um, Journalists really do appreciate that. I know I'm constantly going into my clients' LinkedIn profiles and making sure that the latest media coverage is all over their profile, in the featured section, under their work experience. There's a place to add publications, and even down below there is a dedicated publications section. So as many places as I could get, you know um, space, airtime for that media coverage, I want to do that.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
know,
And journalists are judged by that too. That
right?
these days, they're looked at what their analytics of their stories are, and any way that we can help them boost those analytics is it's a win from both sides. Right?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, Judy, I can't believe we're at time. This was so fun to have you here. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll do this again sometime soon, and hope you'll all tune in next week for another installment of Julie's PR Pattern. Thank you. Have a
That's
great Wednesday.
you too.